Foreign Secretary, he's called James Cleverly. He's in Beijing, or on his way to Beijing today, but he's getting a lot of flack from his MPs, some MPs, because of the government's approach to China. It's the first visit to the country by a Foreign Secretary for quite some years.
That's right. He's going to be addressing issues ranging from climate change, of course, to international security. And let's speak now to former leader of the Conservative Party, Iain Duncan Smith. Good morning, Iain. Thank you very much for joining us. What's your interpretation of this meeting? How far can James Cleverly push those difficult conversations?
Well, not at all. I mean, I think the whole problem with this is that it's not that the governments don't talk to governments and have to try and make arrangements. The problem I've got really here is that, unlike the US, which has set down some very key criticisms of the Chinese government, President Xi and the Communist Party, where they've actually sanctioned people who are responsible for things like the genocide of the Uyghur in Xinjiang, where sanctioned people who are responsible for the crackdown in Hong Kong and the trashing of the Sino-British Agreement, threatened China, warned them on a whole variety of areas. My problem for us here is that the British government has not followed suit in most of that. So, for example, we've sanctioned no Chinese official responsible for trashing the Sino-British Agreement in Hong Kong and arresting people like Jimmy Lai, peaceful democracy campaigners. We've sanctioned nobody, three very low-level officials in Xinjiang, whereas America sanctioned 12 of the most senior people. So when we go over there, the problem is our new policy, which is robust pragmatism, which is something straight out of Yes Minister. The Chinese just think we're visiting them as part of the extended empire, and that we're just one of those regions that eventually will do homage to them. And I think this is a problem.
What is the thinking behind it, Iain, as you understand it? Is it because we want to get more trade deals done with the Chinese? Because we've seen the horror with so many people about the fact the Chinese are involved in our 5G. We don't want them involved in our power stations. But do you think Cleverly's out there banging the drum for British business? And if that's the case and it brings investment here and jobs, is that not a good thing?
Well, first of all, I think there's a second minister going over at the same time to talk to them about business links.
Right.
The problem is we are actually too much in hock to China anyway on almost everything that is produced. And a lot of it is produced by slave labor. That's a fact of life. And many companies don't properly declare that, which they're meant to by law. So first and foremost, China trashes the WTO, the World Trade Organization. All the rules that are about non-subsidizing by government are completely abandoned by China. So companies like Huawei were subsidized to, I was told, to 100% of any bid they make. The result was, of all the companies in the free world that were in telecoms, they all abandoned it. There was no money left for them. So we were only left with 2 or 3 companies in the West, whereas China now dominates that area. And they do it in every single area they come to. My concern really here, and I think this is mostly because others have visited, that the government feels they don't want to be left behind. Because when the German foreign minister visited, she came back and made it very clear that she thought there was no point in talking to the Chinese at all about human rights. And she said they just don't listen. They glaze over, they wait for you to move on to the next subject and say absolutely nothing. And when it comes to climate change, I looked at the chart the other day for the 5 most important economies in the world, of which the UK is the 5th. Of all of them, the UK has the very lowest emissions, right? China is off the scale. Literally, it's like the line's gone almost at 45 degrees off the scale. They're building coal-fired power stations almost every few weeks. They also dominate battery production and electric car production. They're going to swamp us with it. So this is the real problem. What are we going over for?
Right.
Is it more business? Is it more trade with them? Or is it to tell them that unless they get their act together and stop abusing people, using slave labor, etc., then we won't trade with them? But we're not doing any of that.
It sounds a little bit, Iain, like what you're saying is that power has shifted so significantly in the last probably 2 or 3 decades that China are much more powerful than us on the global stage, that we, as our little island, formerly fabulously powerful across the world, have been, to some extent, left behind. Arguably, this was also emphasised at the recent BRICS summit. If you just reflect on that a bit, so Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, we should be frightened of that collaboration, shouldn't we? Not just from a security point of view, but from a financial point of view.
I not really think so. BRICS is a peculiar amalgamation. China is trying to use it, and Russia will try to use it to create an alternative to the free world. But I noticed that India dismissed that at the same time. They're not really interested in stepping away from the real trade balances that would come from places like the UK, Europe, the USA, Australia, and the Southeast Asia. So I think I'm not overly worried about that. I think this is very much an obvious game by China and by Russia, which I believe that we should intervene in and not make work. We are, by the way, the fifth largest economy in the world and about the third most powerful navy, etc. So we're still a powerful player in all of this. My concern here with this visit is it looks to me very much like a visit for a visit's sake, because we're not going to really lay the law down about them. If we really meant business, we would have started sanctioning many of these officials responsible for these abuses. America's done it. Australia done it. We simply don't seem capable of stepping up to that. And we haven't even declared Xinjiang's murderous behavior of the Chinese government there as a genocide. We just say we can't declare it, whereas America's done it. And finally, Jimmy Lai in Hong Kong, a British citizen, under arrest, trumped up charges, will never see the light of day again. He only wants us to declare him a British citizen. The British government refuses to do it. America calls him a British citizen. Europe calls him a British citizen. The government that can't call him a British citizen apparently is the British government. What a pathetic game is being played out.
It ain't a great look. Ian, if we could just, on a gear change, for pressure of time, you saw the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone yesterday. Huge wave of public anger across the region, people smashing up the surveillance cameras, cutting through wires. This affects your constituency very strongly. What is your view about the fact people are now taking the law into their own hands because they're so fed up with the idea of this expansion?
Well, I never condone anybody who takes the law into their own hands, but I do understand why they're doing it, because they believe that they haven't been listened to. And it's dangerous for politicians to railroad a sort of a process which damages people's lives. The fact is, we've now discovered that the mayor and his deputies tried to gerrymander reports that were coming from universities on air quality in outer London. We know that TfL's own report said that the extension would bring next to no difference to air quality in outer London. And then you've had these other reports, which they tried to get altered, they tried to block, that said, actually, there is no difference, no change, because outer London, by and large, is a pretty clean zone. Our area that I'm in is known as a blue zone. It means it has very high air quality. It's right next to Epping Forest. All of this is not about the air quality. It's a complete lie by the mayor. What he's doing is he's fundraising, because he's made such a haulix of his running of London that he's in real debt. And what he needs to do now is raise funds. So it's 12.50 now, but you watch this space. If he gets re-elected next year, it will jump. It will start to go much higher, 20 quid maybe, £25. Because it's about raising money. He knows people can't stop coming to do business. So many of those vans, the plumbers, the electricians and others who are doing business and live outside London come in, they will have to pay more as well. So this is a fundraiser, and it's a fundraiser which will damage the lives of people, particularly the poor, and more importantly, in a way, those who have retired, pensioners who are on fixed incomes, who more often bought their last car, if you know what I mean. They say, right, we will plan now to have a car that sees us pretty much for the next 15, 20 years, low usage. They now find these cars will be chargeable on the ULEZ zone. And it just is appalling. He hasn't listened. He's arrogant. He's incompetent. And he's completely incapable of acting properly, trying to suppress those reports to let the honest policy be led by information that is from scientists, I think is shocking, frankly. And people in London should know this mayor is out to preserve his own skin. It's got nothing to do with air quality in outer London.
All right, that's a very robust Iain Duncan Smith, former leader of the Tory party.